So I would say maybe we just take advantage of this slot and try to do that. And so I think there's enough of us that can maybe speak about those issues. So maybe I'll just try to be a moderator of sorts and have a conversation. So my name is Robert Guerra. I'm with Freedom House. I'm the director of their Internet Freedom Program, and so I've been following a lot of these issues. And let me just maybe scope out things that are here. Is maybe different perspectives that folks have had on the great changes that have taken place in the Middle East and different social media and the role of companies and NGOs and some of the challenges. And I would say something that's greatly needed from my perspective is best practices for folks on the ground for them to stay safe, and what's the most appropriate type of media that can be used. So I'll maybe start with that and maybe go around those in the room to just maybe say who they're with, and maybe we can get an idea of some common threads and then have a discussion around that. So I'll stop with that and just give the floor to the next person that may want to speak.
You don't want us to go all the way around the room. It's only if you wanted to say something.
I mean, we can go around the room,
no,
but
I think it's more efficient if we...
Yeah, so if people want to just introduce themselves if they're interested, and then as we go around, I would say, who you are, organization, and what you see as maybe being some of the key challenges that occurred over the last 9 months, and what would be helpful going forward if something like that were to happen again, how that affects companies, how they can best help, either publicly or behind the scenes, for civil society. What are some of their challenges? And I would say the role of what people think the role of governments may be as well. So I'll stop that and yield the floor to whoever wants. So yield the floor here.
Okay. Hi. I think I'm just happy for such miracles. They really happen. I would like to talk about some study I had done on the use of social media for citizen policy engagement. Yes, I'm coming to that just now. That was in West Africa. It was a study done this year. And because I lived in that country called Côte d'Ivoire that had elections and 2 presidents, 2 governments, and all of that, and I was looking into the use of internet for citizen participation, and I would love to talk about first on policy, and second on the use of internet for humanitarian purposes in post-crisis situations. I work for myself for an organization called NENNA, NNENNA.org, which is a consultancy platform for the use of internet for development in Africa. That is also my name, NENNA. So my email is nenna@nenna.org.
Vint. Do you want to go next?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that we would have a more extended intervention. Well, let me just... fine. I'm Vince Cerf. I'm Google's chief internet evangelist, among other things. My first reactions to this topic are that governments that are afraid of regime change, or that don't have a mechanism for, let's say, peaceful regime change, will be made more afraid by seeing what's happened with the use of social media, especially in this series of incidents that have been called the Arab Spring. The side effect of that, I think, is that in those regimes there will be a heightened determination to interfere with the use of social media for political participation. So despite the fact that those of us who love democracy and applaud the idea that citizens should be able to participate, it may be that their participation will be made more difficult as a consequence of this. I also want to point out, though, that regime change, which is violent, and even when it is not, can sometimes lead to very complex situations and possibly serious consequences. There's a book called The J Curve by Ian Bremmer, and he talks about movement from the systems that are autocratic to systems that are democratic, and that in the course of that change, sometimes you have significant economic effects, negative economic effects. So while we may be celebrating participation, government participation, if it leads to an unplanned regime change, there could be all kinds of other consequences. This is not to argue against the use of social media for participation, but it is simply to recognize that there could be consequences if it's not taking place in an environment that's friendly to citizen participation.
If I can follow, I'm Richard Allen, and I'm the Director of Policy at Facebook for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I was the first point of contact, I think, in the company for a lot of the events that took place over the last year, and have been trying to deal with that, working with a lot of NGO partners, including Freedom House, to make sure that we can respond appropriately. I was also the first point of contact for the British government when they recently proposed perhaps turning off the internet in the UK as a result of the riots that we had in London, which I also lived through, and I know received extensive coverage at the time. So it's been a very core part of my debate.
I'm sorry to intervene, but the members, a representative from the Home Secretary spoke to this point earlier in a session and said that that was not what anyone proposed. So that was misreported, unless you have personal experience with the government asking you to shut down something.
No, so I will clarify, I was from those discussions. What happened was that the Prime Minister made a speech to say that we must make sure that people can't access social media to cause mischief during a riot, and then the people who were spinning that message to the press did imply that it would lead to measures where they could turn social media off. They could instruct that. They didn't instruct it at the time, but they said they would seek powers to do so. A lot of people explained to them why this was not a very good idea, and then they came back and revised their position.
So if I could also give you a small anecdote, which is quite amusing. At some point, it was asserted, and maybe true, that someone tweeted that we should all go to this place and rob that store. The police were on the tweet stream as well, and they said, fine, we'll meet you there.
Exactly, and actually that nearly brings me to my point, actually, which is a lot of the attention is paid to social media when it is a force of opposition or a force of disruption. So what you actually saw in the British riots was, for example, a very small number of people, literally a handful of people, creating really dangerous content, encouraging people to break the law, and that content was removed. And then you saw millions of people get together to organize groups like Let's Have a Cup of Tea instead of rioting, let's go and clean up after the riots, yeah, let's go and spend money with the shopkeepers whose shops have been damaged by the riots. So you had millions of people doing positive things and a small number of people doing negative. And I think similarly in the political world, you often have millions of people taking part in normal elections through social media, and very rarely does that turn into violent incidents. So I'm fascinated. The reason for coming to the workshop, to wrap up on that, was I'm really fascinated by what will now happen in countries like Egypt and Tunisia as they enter electoral processes and start to use social media in the normal course of politics rather than for the very powerful revolutionary effect. But I say that to me seems like an exception, and the norm is using media for regular politics. I'm fascinated people have perspectives on that in this group.
Sure. Ian Schuler. I'm currently at the State Department working on internet freedom programs, and for some time before coming to the State Department worked for 10 years at National Democratic Institute, an organization that promotes democracy and their technology interventions. And I just wanted to add to some of the points that have been made. I do think that I am excited to see how technology be used to rebuild, because I do think it's a different set of approaches and technologies to to engage in mass protest, to sort of tear down the old structures, than it will be to rebuild new structures. And I think that certainly we still need to develop what those approaches are. And you're right that some of that is going on already, but particularly in places where that are devoid of institutions, building those new institutions provides new opportunities to really increase the engagement and the ability of these tools to create that link between citizens and government. And so one area that I would highlight that seems maybe an area to be wary of is that there's a lot of attention on the power of citizen media or tools that empower individuals. There's been less work on the the supply side of political power. So there's been a lot of work to try to empower people and make their voices heard, but the receiver side, to listen to those voices, to do something about them, to manage all of these conversations that are coming in and deliver services or manage opinions and create legislation that's responsive to that, isn't happening as well. And so there's a danger of creating a lot of allowing people to release their frustration, but only to be more frustrated when they don't see that positively contributing in a meaningful way into the governing process. And so I'll leave that for the conversation.
Thank you. My name is Amr Gharbey and I come from Cairo. Yes. For the past 5, 6, 7 years, actually, I've been working with a number of activists and citizen journalists on creating what's proven to be the prototype of what we have seen recently in Egypt and other countries. So using the internet as a publishing platform, but also as a platform for organization. And at this stage, at least, I'd like to draw the attention to 2 days that in the Egyptian course of events. The 25th of January, where tens of thousands of people, including myself, have responded to an event that was sent on Facebook to gather in Tahrir Square, and the 12 million people who 3 days later have responded to the crackdown on that. The difference between the 50,000 and the 12 million people is the same difference in my mind between Facebook and Al Jazeera, or the same difference between Twitter and face-to-face communication. The social media, at least let me at this stage say that the social media is good for creating a situation, it's good for creating a crisis, but it does not really constitute all the reasons and all the elements you need for a process like we have seen in Egypt. Personally, the most useful technology that I've used this year, at least, were blankets, stones and sticks, and not Facebook and Twitter.
Thank you. I'm Sebastian Rwengabo from the Singapore Internet Research Center. I have 3 opinions and observations to share. One is that in every society, in every country, there will always be a group of people or some people who are discontented with their government, with their political leadership. That is a fact. However, politicians in less democratic and less effective governments and societies are threatened, they are besieged, they are worried about this internet-facilitated political engagement. They will respond by clamping down on internet services that facilitate these demands. They may develop systems and mechanisms of countering these activities. And that brings me to my second observation. Governments, and especially political leaders, will also develop their own counter Facebook debates, throw up their functionaries, and they start countering these demands through the same forum, through the same debates. We know China has its own version of Facebook. I don't know whether you are aware. China has a version of Facebook that is not the usual Facebook that we are using, and it is able to control that Facebook by making sure that if there are mobilizational activities on that Facebook, they can be deleted quickly so that it's not used as a means of mobilizing people against the government. So that is one way of countering the activities of these people. But the third idea I have to point out is that sometimes illegitimate, irresponsible developments may be spread through the same space, through the same systems, and our concern is, must every demand, every expectation, for instance, lead to a demonstration like we had in London, and a violent one for that matter? So the expectation that people should have rights should be balanced with rights and responsibilities, so that we don't expect that whenever people have rights, they will mobilize on Facebook and then they go on the streets and become violent. So now we are shifting from the internet originally as a social space to a space of political contestation, and as someone already pointed out, I think we are heading towards an internetocracy where we are going to be using it for political mobilization. We have to see this take place, especially in these developing countries, but Obama is already using it very effectively for his political activities, and I think the politicians in Kenya have already started as I talk of now. Thank you.
So I think it's great we're going back and talking to the different stakeholders. So what I'll do is I'll take the intervention from over there, and then I'll get someone who's, I managed to pull out of another workshop who's from Tunisia to talk about her perspective of social media, and then I'll go back to this side. So gentlemen, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Rufus. I'm from Kenya. My concern is that the parliamentarians we have in Kenya here are not ICT literate. They don't know anything about ICT. And they have all the facilities in Parliament, but they know nothing about the ICT world. And they're the ones who perpetrate violence in this country. So I don't know, how can we educate these people into getting into the ICT world? I don't know what can be done. Thank you.
Sure. So one of the things I mentioned in the beginning is one of the things I wanted to get out is what are some needs, maybe what are some best practices, and I think an echo that we have is education, I think is key. And so as we go forward, I'd be interested in the panelists, apart from introducing themselves, also to talk about any initiatives or things that they may have done to try to reach out to the different stakeholders in regards to just general use of social media, but then particularly if there are particular issues in their environment, how they've relayed, whether it's security, whether it's other things. Governments and NGOs will have different concerns. So, Ian, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, just quickly on that. I mean, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of politicians over the years on exactly these sorts of things, and you're right that politicians aren't inclined to, they're risk averse in some ways, and that they don't want to be the first person out there. But if they think that everybody else is doing it and it gives them an advantage, then they certainly want to be on that train as well. And so, one technique that's been successful is finding those few people who get it, the 2 or 3 advocates, the 2 or 3 members of Parliament who really understand, and help them to win, help them to do better, and demonstrate how this helps them to win elections better, serve their constituents better, get better press, things that really appeal to politicians, and then everyone will try to pick it up. They'll all be coming to your door, knocking on your door, trying to figure out how they can do this too.
Hello, I'm Amira. I'm from Tunisia. I am a human rights activist. I worked a lot in the issues of censorship in Tunisia. And now I'm running for the elections as head of an independent list. So in the end of October, Tunisian will rewrite their constitution, and that's why I'm in these elections. To speak about the role of social medias in Tunisia, I have a vision. Maybe you will not like it, but I think that social media and internet really can help to change things if we use it to change things in real life. So we have internet in Tunisia was used to spread the word, to show what was happening there, and to group people together to demonstrate in real life. So I think that internet and social media and Facebook helped us to get spotlights on Tunisia and in the Tunisian revolution, and it was the same thing in Egypt. So do you have questions or something?
Because this is an ad hoc session, I think that the introduction is good. And then if people have questions or comments on what other people have said, let's just go around that way. So there was a comment from you, and then we'll go to you, Nena. So please. Sorry, there's two. So we'll have 1, 2, then Nena, and then we'll go to this side of the room afterwards. So, sir. And then we'll go there, and then we'll go here.
Good morning. My name is Mohammed Burhan. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, and so I come from Cairo as my compatriot here. And I would like to say that Egypt has experienced the social media impact in the biggest sense ever. For one, I never used Facebook before the revolution. I participated in the revolution, of course, and I started using Facebook afterwards. We have seen how institutions like the armed forces, the cabinet of ministers, institutions that we would never think they could ever relate to people through the internet, are using their Facebook pages to promote policies, to inform people of changes in the ministers themselves. Like, for example, the current Prime Minister, the decision to assign him or to nominate him was passed to the public through Facebook. So you turn on the TV and you find the state media news saying that according to the Facebook page of the Egyptian cabinet of ministers, the following Prime Minister was assigned. So we have seen how institutions have changed their mindset and are using Facebook in many ways. On another hand, we see the public. People are informing each other of someone who has a blood problem, a blood type problem, someone who has a disease that could be solved in some ways. We found that we have teenagers who have implemented a sort of software which informs people of traffic flow, and they have remote stations scattered around the city, and they would inform people that don't take this route, you can take that other route. So people are using Twitter and Facebook and social media in ways that are just you could never imagine nine months ago. Of course, what happened in Egypt has had a lot of grassroots involvement from the Egyptian social society and the civil society. But of course, what triggered the events was the Great Revolution of Tunis. So I'd like to thank the Tunisian people for inspiring the Arab world for that, and I'd like to give a hand to the Tunisian people, if you may.
I was only going to ask if that traffic flow system is coming to Nairobi.
Maybe.
Then here, and then we'll try this side of the room if there's any comments from this side. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Actually, it's almost noon. My name is Abdul Ghani Jama. and I'm the director of AstisNet based here in Nairobi. It seems that the social media focus is only for political aspect, or maybe that is the area. As you know, there are prevailing disasters taking place, famine in the Horn of Africa, 5 countries. And it seems in this aspect of humanitarian and disaster prevention, this is where you find the social media is fail in engaging, mobilizing, and extending the information that is taking place in Africa, Horn of Africa. So even the countries in the north, they seem to be focusing more on the political aspect on the Facebook or social media. What we need to know, that is why most of African and Arab heads of states, they become the most hated on social media because it's a threat, direct threat to their existence. But I think what we would like to see is on the humanitarian side, on the disaster prevention, informing and engaging in the Western world. And this is the area that we need to focus more rather than just focusing on the, revolution is taking place is good in Tunisia and in Egypt. But what it has been done when it comes to the current famine in the Horn of Africa. Thank you.
That's an excellent point. Before I go to the other folks, I'm just going to have a comment out to the room. If anyone here can talk about how social media has been used in other parts of the world for Haiti or for elsewhere, we'll raise that. So we have you, Avery, and then you, Mr. Surf. And then
that's what I want to share, because I was part of those who used social media before, during, and after a political crisis in Cote d'Ivoire. I'll try to be as short as possible. One other, on the general point, I think that if you think that policymakers are not aware of social media, you are dead wrong. I have had to interview a whole lot of them during the study. I'm not talking about what I think, I'm talking about empirical data. Across West Africa, I went through 7 countries. Every single policymaker is aware of what is happening. Whether he likes it or not, that's another different. That's a different thing. Now, engagement is increasing. From my experience in West Africa, it was not just the Arab Spring, but before, during, and after, engagement in social media is increasing. And I had a survey on that. It is wrong to think that those who are on social media are children, are delinquents. My study shows that most of the people on social media who spend time on it are actually highly trained people who are motivators and have the capacity to encourage others, motivate others. So people on social media are actually they have a multiplier effect. That is important for every policymaker. If you don't know it now. Now, the other thing that my study showed is that engagement is increasing. There isn't going to be any single election in Africa that will take place that social media is not going to play a major role. That is sure. You can quote me on that. Now, coming to our experience in Cote d'Ivoire, what did we do with social media before crisis came? Basically, we started a citizen watch around elections. Have you collected your voter's card? What are the issues with the voter's card? What are your impressions so far? Are you going to vote? What will you do after you vote? When will you arrive? How will you dress? We wanted to hype up the citizens just to get the ambience going. That was what we did. Take pictures, who has a better publicity, who is doing better. And then there was the face-to-face presidential debate. I remember they did it for 3 hours standing. We analyzed their dressing, how they were standing, is he sweating? I live tweeted. That it was fun at the beginning. That is what we did before crisis came. And now when crisis hit, they locked down SMS. They locked down a lot of communication. So Twitter became the only way we could communicate with ourselves. And of course, Twitter all of a sudden became flooded by Gbagbo's side and Ouattara's side, by the left and the right. We have people operating 4 or 5 Twitter accounts and sending the same messages. And we had people changing their Twitter avatar and their Twitter handles because they were now being tracked down. We had people physically disappearing because they were hosting Facebook pages for opponents of X or Y. And people like me had, on one time, I mean, you are sitting down in 10 minutes and you get 100 followers whose names are not their names. And you get names like Juvan Muri, you will soon die. Okay? In that case, I pick up my stuff, I pack up my stuff, I go to the airport, I buy the next available ticket, and I leave the country. And when I get there, I'm on roaming, and you're calling me on my Abidjan number, and I'm picking your phone, and you're still threatening me, but they don't know I'm out of the country. Alright? Now, when communication really goes down, we begin a call center in Accra. Basically, what we did at that time was humanitarian services. Someone needs dialysis, someone needs blood, someone needs to be picked up. We want to know which pharmacy is open, which doctors are on. Basically, people couldn't call, so we tell you, this is our number, just give us a missed call. You do it in Africa, you flash, you beep, and then we're going to call you back. And we were doing phone conferences. She is pregnant, you are the doctor, her husband beeps us, we call you, we call the husband, we put you on a phone conference. And we had 3 children delivered that way. The husband had to help the wife deliver because the doctor was on the other side of the phone. Right? We had lots of things like that. Which maternity is open, then we're calling Red Cross and telling them this person has been shot, you need to go there. You know, we talked on phone until I thought my head had doubled, but I think it came back to normal. So that is what social media could do. We had a group, permanence. What is permanence in English? A permanent group on Skype. We had a permanent group on BlackBerry Messenger. We had a permanent group, of course, on Twitter, and a permanent group on Facebook. And once something is happening, everybody is sending the. We didn't sleep for 2 weeks. We never slept for 2 weeks because messages were going around. People were dying of hunger, and we were going to call someone who is beside you to tell you that your neighbor downstairs has no food. Could you just put some food and pass it through the window so he could eat? We did all of that, and we were not paid for it. Okay? Now, let me stop that and talk about what happens after the war is won and lost. Now, you need to begin. We started something like CIV Auto. CIV Auto was the hashtag for recovering stolen vehicles, reporting stolen vehicles, and all of the car is parked here, you need to pick it up. What's the color? Who knows who owns it? So we started that. Now we started CIV Next, which is another hashtag for what else can we do? Reconciliation messages, giving correct information, giving news, encouraging people, reminding people of all the good things about the country, and basically rebuilding. Until one day I saw that the Prime Minister of the new government shows up on Twitter. And then I see someone following me. I'm like, hey, Sorogium, that's the Prime Minister. And and because we were used to keeping vigil already, people were like, is that you? He said, yes, that's me. And I'm right here with the Minister of Youth. The guy who used to be his media advisor, he has now become the Minister of Youth. So he told him, guy, you better come over because the country is online. So every time he comes on, we're like firing him with questions. How about this? How about that? How about this? How about that? So now we have an ongoing consultation with government. I mean, when we're talking government, we're talking about the Minister of Defense, the Prime Minister, the Youth Minister. And they're saying, you understand there is a Truth and Reconciliation Committee in Cote d'Ivoire. They told us, you have followed this. Who do you think should be on this Truth and Reconciliation Committee? It was from our side we said we wanted Didier Drogba in there, and today he's in. So I think there's quite a number of things that social media can do. It's not social media that does it, it's the citizens who do it. So basically we have a concept of Wonzomai, which means the citizens who are citizen reporters. We are not politicians. We just report what we see. And by and large, the politicians have come to respect people like us. Granted, there will be subversive use of social media, but I think that it is up to human rights activists to stand and toe that line. Every day they still contact me. What do you think about this? What do you think about it? So it's that intellectual ascendancy that citizen media has, that we're neither to the left nor to the right. As we say it, we are not partisan, but we can't be neutral because development is involved. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nana. I think I was just making a couple of points, and before I go to the next speakers, we have about half an hour left, and so I just want to make sure that we get some responses from those that may have spoken already, but also some new voices as well. So far, what I've heard in terms of the role of education, highlighting that social media is not just for advocating for political change, but in some cases, and one was illustrated, that it can also be used for both that and also, I wouldn't say disasters, but emergencies that take place in the country. The issue of call centers that has been discussed by many other groups in terms of is there a best practice around that? How can that be done in a sustainable fashion? And something that's assumed that wasn't mentioned is for everyone to be on Twitter and Facebook, there needs to be an enabling environment and the networks need to be up. And that's a way, maybe if even the government is using it, the incentive's not to turn it off, because then there's no way to reach, and the government may not be able to communicate with itself. I'll go to Avri, and then Vidsurf, and then we'll get another question from this side, and then go back. Avri, please.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Avri Doria. I'm an itinerant research consultant. It's not really connected to any group. I have a question and a concern going forward, and that's whenever a meeting like this, some open governance meeting that includes many people, allows people from the country to get involved, it sort of opens up a brief window where social media and other methods can be used for people to speak more freely. Once the circus leaves town, once the meeting leaves town, it then, and this has been seen several times in several meetings, it then allows for a degree of repression on those that took advantage of the fact that there was an open window when communication was freer for a week. One of the things that therefore I look at, for example, as these meetings go ahead, as perhaps these meetings go to places where the window of freedom isn't quite as open as it is in other places, and that window does open briefly. Is there a way, taking things like have been said already, to prepare for what will happen when this enabling event leaves town, without being at all specific about where we're going and how we're going to do it, but basically, how do we set something up so that the shutting of the network is circumvented, that the processes for communication are left open, and is there a will to actually spend the 12 months before a meeting happens to actually prepare for that opening of the window of expression and the repression that invariably comes after the circus leaves town? Thank you.
I'll make a quick comment in terms of what may be useful as a follow-up. If we have any action items that we might want to do as a result of this session, maybe an open letter to the Secretary General in terms of an enabling environment, but more importantly, if there are different multi-stakeholders that are in this room, there are a couple of companies here, there's probably some governments, are there ways that we can work together to plan ahead in terms of even participants who may not feel safe going to a particular place or just can't travel there, to create that space in preparing for the session, but participating in a more robust way.
So I agree with you. I think that, by the way, remote participation is also something that we should be cognizant of pursuing. I just wanted to mention one other thing. In addition to the various social media that have been mentioned in humanitarian crisis situations, We found at Google 3 things that have been very, very helpful. One of them is Google Earth, another is Google Maps, and the third is People Finder. All of these are not social media applications, but they are, in many cases, geographically oriented applications that allow people to take information that they have and make it visible to others. So where is the fire now? Where are the evacuation centers? Where can I get food? Where are the hospitals or the centers, temporary shelters and things like that? In the case of People Finder, it was a very helpful way of letting people know that you were okay, or in some cases discovering that someone was not. So I only draw your attention to that to say that the internet is richer than just social media.
Sorry, I just want to, I'll take one speaker here, over there, and then someone from Ushahidi is here who can talk about maybe some of the work in Haiti. So let's do there, and then here.
Can I? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. My name is Atsushi Yamanaka, and I'm ICT advisor for the government of Rwanda, actually. I just wanted to, the positive aspect of social media. Our president basically talks to people through Twitter. He has 29,000 followers, and he actually has a very, very lively conversation, actually. So, for the politicians as well, it's actually a very good way of reaching out to the people directly and getting what people actually want. And to credit to my president, basically, he basically also have very, very heated discussions in the Twitters as well, and he responds to that. And so that's, I think, is a very, very positive use of, the social media for the politicians, because oftentimes, and this is a question I wanted to ask, I think traditional media sometimes self-censors, or they do actually a lot of, the backward actually editing. And a lot of politicians, these actually new social media is giving them the opportunity to directly talk to their constituencies and directly actually, asking what is your real problems and so on. For example, like my president basically got a Twitter feed from a student in the university. He said, like, my internet connection is so slow. What can you do about it? And obviously he called our, Minister of ICTs, and he called several people. So what's going on? We have spent so much money on our investment. And, but of course, it takes a long time to fix it, but at least he's aware of these problems. So that's a positive side of use of social medias. And the questions about, what we can do about, traditional media, self-censorship. How can you actually teach, basically, or how can you empower the traditional media to also be able to basically, more space actually on reporting. And the final things, my colleague from Japan, actually, Izumi, was saying, going back to the Jama's actually comment about use of, social medias for social development or the emerging situations. We in Japan, during the course of the earthquake in Japan, and tsunami incident, we have actually greatly used Twitter and also other social medias, including Ushahidi based, by the way. And we are currently conducting a thorough studies on how this social media was used in the disaster recovery and mitigation situation. So I just wanted to comment on that. Thanks.
Interesting that you're saying that you're in Japan and you're Prime Minister, and you're from Rwanda as well. But
yeah, my president from Rwanda is using it. I'm not sure my Prime Minister in Japan is using it, by the way.
we had a comment in the back row, please.
My name is Lois Kerubo Bosire. I work as I'm the Assistant Director ICT with the Ministry of Information and Communications, Kenya. Yeah, I do. As the ministry, as the ICT ministry, we have a major role in providing the ICT infrastructure, and this we've done by facilitating the deployment of a submarine cable, the TEAMS. We are also deploying the terrestrial cables, and with this, we've seen a growth in the usage of ICT because broadband is not a problem now, and I'm sure you are appreciating it now as you are in this room. Broadband is not an issue. And of course, this has provided an environment for the usage of social media. And then, even in the political side, we've seen politicians engaging in the use of social media, especially like this year during the budget. Our Minister for Finance was using social media to give the updates on Twitter on the status of the budgets, and he was even engaging with the public using social media. We've seen politicians, when they are doing their campaigns, launch campaign websites, and with this they are able to do much more and reach the communities using the social media. Also, the government has used SMS facility to reach the citizens. In this year, when we had famine in the country, the ministry engaged a call center, and the citizens were able to give responses about their famine, about their status, and the government was able to reach the citizens using the SMS. So there is the positive side of it, of social media, and in the usage of the government to reach its citizens. The environment is ripe in Kenya, and I believe everywhere else. As I listen to the discussions, it's like now we are there, we are moving ahead. But what I would suggest is that we now need to look at the policies, because whereas we believe it's very good, it's very good, it has the positive side of it, but we also need to think of what policies, because everything needs to be governed. I mean, we need to look at the policies to make sure that it's not abused or it's done in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention.
Hello everyone, my name is Juliana Rotich, co-founder and executive director of Ushahidi. Just to add to the discussion, social media can be an enabler when you have a fast-moving situation and you need real-time awareness of the situation on the ground. Invariably, I'm sure people have talked about the growth of mobile phones. These are the devices that people have in their pockets. So with services that can be accessed on mobile phones, you have the ability to provide services that can help you crowdsource or aggregate data from people on the ground, take that data, organize it based on location, and that obviously there has to be some verification. Speaking about governance and sort of finding the truth, it's really important to also listen to the crowd, because when you have something going on, they invariably have something to say. And oftentimes, with our experience, we've found that some of that information is actionable or can be actionable. The question here is, are we supporting the systems that bring that information and make it available so that the people who are charged with actually acting upon this and alleviating poverty or alleviating crisis situation have the most recent information that they can? Just to give you a bit of context on how we've seen this come to fruition, first was around the Haiti earthquake. We had launched the Ushahidi platform, and it had been used in Kenya and around elections and a few other places. But with the Haiti earthquake, we partnered with Digicel. So again, that kind of goes back to the idea of not only thinking about governance, but also thinking about the partnerships that can come in at at a crisis, during a crisis situation, what sort of partnerships can make the situation better. In our experience, that was the internet community of volunteers. It was the mobile service provider. In the case of Haiti, that was Digicel. It was other organizations like Frontline SMS and Instead. Those are organizations that banded together and worked together to gather information, verify, geolocate it, and present it so that people, so that first responders could use some of that information in addition to the other sources that they were getting. And we've also seen this progression of the idea of crowdsourcing, not just in crisis situations, more so even in elections. I was recently in Zambia, where there were elections, and by and large it seemed to go fine, except for specific areas where the lids for the ballot boxes were missing. The citizens were able to use an SMS number 3018 and quickly say, look, this is what's going on here. And if the ECZ and other organizations can listen to the crowd, they know that they need to act in order to make sure that the process is free and fair, and people actually see them being responsive. So I think I'll stop there, and Robert, if you have any questions.
Yes, hello. My name is Simon Peter Ogwang. I come from the Pearl of Africa, that is Uganda. I work with Transparency International Uganda as a project coordinator. Taking you back to the part of education, when you look at developing countries, we have a challenge in civic education. Civic education is always done a month before the election takes place. Immediately after the elections are over, you don't see an organization actively getting involved in civic education. So, which means that there's a little time taken to educate people on how they can take preventive measures in terms of making sure that there's no violence, that people are united still and welcome results. But coming to IGF today, we need to realize that we have various tools that we can use to educate people online, the different social media that we're having. Let us engage people to make sure that even without funding, we are still able to educate people. Because I've seen even donors, they don't provide calls for proposals, immediate elections are over. When elections are near, you see lots and lots of call proposals in line with democracy, civic education. I think let us bridge this gap by making sure that we educate our people even 5 years before an election takes place. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Otieno Namwaya. I'm a human rights activist in Kenya. The issue of social media in Kenya has been of serious interest of late because we have two schools of thought on that issue. On the one side, we have the human rights and civil society groups that are engaged in a serious debate on how best social media can be used to effect both political and socio-economic change. But on the other hand, we have the government, which is more concerned with the issue of hate speech, because in the post-election violence that we had, there was a lot of hate speech that was spread around, and I think the fear right now is that with the election coming, social media might be used negatively for that purpose. So the country is grappling with how to balance the positive aspects of social media and the negative aspects of social media. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a few quick comments on some of the things that were said. To my colleague from Uganda, I think you're right that there's a greater recognition and interest in the donor community as well in not just focusing on elections and recognizing that democracy goes past elections, and in particular using technology to build institutions, which sort of goes back to the comment that I made in the beginning, that we need to figure out what those methods are. But even in Uganda, there were tools for reporting even a year out in front of elections, but that's not enough. We need to expand between as well. To the comment on using events to sort of expand the window, I mean, I think that you're right. It's good to pay attention to those sorts of things a year more in advance, and I think Robert had some good ideas in there. I think it's worthy of a follow-up conversation on what are the types of things that can be done around events. I think often these sorts of events have an agreement, a host country agreement, that could be one mechanism for trying to make space happen, but there's a lot of pieces that are involved in that. And then I wanted to go back to something that Vint Cerf had said at the beginning about this new wave of sort of repression 2.0 and the way that governments are responding to people's use of these tools. And this is something that our sister from Cote d'Ivoire talked about in very real terms, in the way that people were attacked online, that services were cut off. And I think that these sorts of forums that we need to really band together to push back on attempts to control the online space, to manipulate it in a way that does not facilitate this sort of expression, empowerment, and democracy. And one area that I think is worth focusing a bit more, particularly when it comes to building democracies, there's a lot of attention in some of the panels that I've been in on freedoms of expression and freedoms of privacy, but less of an emphasis on freedom of association and freedom of assembly, which I think are really what has been important in the stories that I've heard. And so, and it matters because if you're paying attention to association and assembly, there are other sorts of technology that you might protect or things that you might build. For instance, preserve how you manage spectrum in order to preserve unlicensed bandwidth for community mesh. It takes on a greater level of importance when you're really trying to preserve the ability of people to associate within their own communities. And so I just want to throw that out there and make the and see if we can keep that in mind as well when we're thinking about online rights.
Hi, my name is Tihal Abu Ali. I'm from Bahrain. I'm an activist following the issues related to freedom of press and freedom online. I want to speak about the experience we have seen in Bahrain when the social media have been used. First, they have been used to engage people in the protest and activities, but later we have seen that they are being used for repression of the people. We have seen, especially after the crackdown on the protesters on March 2011, the government have been using Facebook and Twitter to crowdsource people to identify the protesters. There were groups created where some government official will post images and photos of protesters, calling everyone to identify them, and then we will just hear about them that they are being arrested. We have seen people on Facebook changing their names all the time because they were very worried that their content will be used against them. Simple things that are being written on their social pages could be used against them at the court to convict them and to very ambiguous charges like inciting hatred against the regime or involvement in illegal activities. We have seen even people going into very extreme self-censorship when they have started to just closing their pages and get away from the social networks. I know that many people have been trying to connect with Facebook and Twitter to report these pages, to ask them if it's acceptable to have this kind of crowdsourcing that is being that's been putting people in the danger, because arrest also involve getting tortured and being deprived from other rights. But those pages have been not closed, not until today, at least on Twitter. I know this kind of crowdsourcing pages are still there and still being used by the government agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I want to do is maybe take, if there's any of the companies that want to respond to some of the comments that have, so I'll maybe ask you, Vint, and you, Richard, if you want to respond to any of the issues that have come up, both in terms of how technology has been used positively, negatively, and what you can say in terms of what processes you all have in place to deal with it. Thank you.
So, first of all, I think that what we've just heard underscores the importance of either anonymous or pseudonymous speech, the ability to speak freely without necessarily being identified. And although there's often pushback on that point, I think you've heard very clear reasons why that's still very important in some parts of the world. I think that at Google we are proud of the fact that the platforms that we have available can be used freely. And the business model that lets us build these platforms and make them accessible, not only for social expression, but also as a means of improved GDP and opportunities for people to create new businesses, is important. I think many of the sources of unrest often lie in the midst of poor economies, and things that can be done to improve the economy. Generally, it's the tide that lifts all boats. So I hope that we can continue to participate in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard Allen at Facebook, and I know I think we're meeting later, and we'll be able to talk in detail about the Bahraini situation, but I know we have been acting on some of those pages that have been reported, so we can talk about those in detail. As a general approach to this, clearly as a service provider, you don't wish any harm to come to any of the people who use your service as a result of doing so. And there are a number of measures that we've been putting in place. Actually, interestingly, the first sort of major push around this was as a result of the situation in Egypt before the January situation, actually in the elections last year. And the challenge, let me just be really frank, the challenge is when you have a community of 800 million people using a service and billions of objects on the service, how do you identify those that are important amongst all of that noise that's coming in? How do you distinguish aggressive reporting versus genuine cries for help, and so on? So that's a challenge that we have to accept in order to protect the interests of our users. And whilst I don't think we're perfect yet, I think we've made considerable progress over the last year, and we can talk about a lot of that in detail. A lot of it we necessarily wouldn't talk about in public, not because there's anything to be ashamed of, but because it then compromises the existence of the channels that we have in order for people to be able to ask for help. And so we can talk about that more, and anyone individually who wants to talk about that, I'll be happy to do so. Just reflect on a couple of common themes that I've picked out. One is that we just make tools, and I think that's really important. In the Internet Governance Forum, it is actually all about the people who use those tools and what they use them for, and they can use them for ill or bad. The theme from Kenya about hate speech versus political speech actually is absolutely common throughout the world. I deal with lots of countries, and that's an absolutely recurrent theme. And you can take two views. You can when people are able to speak freely, a lot of the speech that they make is very offensive. That just happens, that there is a percentage of speech that people do that's offensive. And if you try and remove all of that offensive speech, you often end up then destroying the very platforms that enable the speech to take place. But there are limits. So where you set that limits is a debate that's happening in every society around the world. It's not particular to any particular country. And I think of fundamental importance to all of us that there is some understanding about where those lines should be drawn. How offensive can one be? For example, I get calls from politicians sometimes to say, this speech should be taken down, it's offensive, and I look at it and it is really, really offensive speech about that politician, but it's a viewpoint, it's a political viewpoint, it's part of a campaign, it's not hate speech. They just don't like that politician for often very good reasons. I won't name the countries. So that's, I think, a really important thing. The second one is multi-channel is really important, but let's not get obsessed with single channels. And two screens matter. Television is king still. Television is the mass mobilizer. There are some countries where you can't access television. Television is so controlled, and I think social media then becomes more important because you have no access to television. But when you have got access, what social media often does is drive television. So it gathers up the video footage that then gets broadcast on television, and that's where it has massive, dramatic impacts. And people do use it in a two-screen way. They're sitting there with a laptop and a TV, and that interaction I think is fascinating. And then all the other channels that they use, whether it's telephone, TV, internet, is really important. And then the last reflection was on this big challenge, which I think is the important one, about the real test for social media is can it drive interest in humanitarian crises or situations that really, I was going to say politics matters, but politics it doesn't matter as much as situations like famine. So I think that question about, that's the really important test, is the extent to which we can do that. And again, it comes back to people's motivation. Getting millions of people signed up to something that says, I want to stop famine in Africa, means nothing compared with perhaps getting 10,000 people actually doing something about it. And those are very big open questions. For social media is demonstrating get millions of people signed up often. I think it is a test that's still there to see whether we can get the thousands of people doing the actual actions that are going to make a difference.
I just we only have 5 minutes left, and so the one thing about the IGF, I think that's keen, and I probably should have done this earlier, is the importance to keep this conversation going on. We should not just have it once a year. And so whether it's through the hashtag or the hashtag of this ad hoc workshop and conversation, but let's try to do that. And so people want to stay engaged. Please post it on Twitter or Facebook, or just let me know afterwards, and we'll try to keep this conversation going forward. So because we have 5 minutes, I want to get someone who hasn't spoken before from the back, and I'll ask that your intervention be really short. And then to loop back from the beginning, we'll have our one of the first speakers from Egypt to maybe wrap up. So please, sir, the back. Please be as short as you can, and then we'll finish with the fellow from Egypt. The floor is yours.
Ammar Mohammed. I work in Al Jazeera channel in social media, and also I am a blogger in Qatar. So just I want to say something that's very important for us if we are tracking what's happened in the Arab Revolution. Before 10 years ago, we didn't find any place to talk about our interesting thing, or if we have any good topic, we discuss this thing in the forums. But while the revolution, a lot of people, they joined the social media, and you see the number of people they use Facebook in April 2010 is double in 2011. So the knowledge of using social media is something that's very important. I agree with you to have continued discussion about this thing, because it's open question and it will not stop and for 2 hours in this discussion. But I am agree. We do a lot of research in the Arab Revolution, but I think we should didn't compare between Tunisia and Egypt and other revolutions, because in each country there is tracking of people from the government, and each government they use some tools that other government they didn't use it before. So this is something important, and I'm very happy to have discussion after that issue. Thank you.
Let me start by agreeing with you that actually social networking tools are just that, they are tools. So they can be used for whatever purpose you want to. But there are people also who are running those tools, and therefore they become community managers, if you will. And that places a role and a responsibility on them, especially that the social networking tools are highly centralized so far. We don't know as users on those communities, on those tools, why a page disappears and why it comes back. And when I file a complaint that there is something wrong about this video or that note, there is no clear channel of follow-up, there is no ticket number, I cannot really find out. the only way that we can, when the Khalid Saeed page disappears, which is about the most important page that has ever appeared on Facebook, is to find a connection through you, to you personally, and that shouldn't be the case, because this only means that the privileged and the high-profile people are the only ones who are protected, and this is not what a democratic medium should be about.
I want to do two things. So we have a comment, so we're just going to go a little bit over. I also have to run to another meeting, but I'll think take home. So for those that are speaking, and I'll say that's myself, and I've mentioned it throughout, what are some key things that going forward we want to report on for this session, but also that are key? So we've talked about call centers, that it's not just about activism, but it's also humanitarian issues and elsewhere. I'll add another point here, which is call centers, but in a sense also that activists and others need a mechanism to report on issues, and then that the variety of different stakeholders that could help in some way to get that to them. And if those don't necessarily scale now, figuring out ways of developing best practices so that could be shared. So I'm all with you that is a very key thing, and I know that a variety of companies, because of the developments over the last 9 months, have found out that those processes need to be improved, and it's good for it. So we'll do a comment from Richard, and then from you, and then unfortunately we'll have to close this session. So please, a brief intervention.
Just to say, we hear you, and that's something that we're working on now. We can talk after in detail about what we might be doing in that space.
So thank you very much. I know we're wrapping up here. My name is Keith Drazik. I work at VeriSign. I just want to sort of acknowledge, I think, the importance and the value of this session, the one that we just had. I came into this meeting by accident. We ended up without a... Exactly. There was some confusion about the scheduling, about whether it was actually going to happen or not. Accidentally or otherwise, I found this to be an extremely valuable session. I am so happy that we continued even without a panel. I want to say that this has been my favorite session of the week so far. I am pretty confident it will be my favorite session at the end of the week. And I want to personally thank all the people who shared their personal experiences, because I personally got a tremendous amount of value out of this. I think this type of a session where there is a free-flowing exchange of information and experiences from people from all sectors. We have government representatives, people that are involved in business and academia, civil society. I think it's been a really, really valuable session. So thank you for all of your personal experiences. And I just want to also say that I think this is one of the reasons, this is a perfect example of one of the reasons why VeriSign, the company I work for, values the IGF as much as we do. This venue, this opportunity to get together and to exchange these views and have this dialogue has been really just fantastic. And I'm going to recommend to the people that I know that are involved in the coordination of IGF meetings that we do more sessions without a panel.
It's going on now. I've started a campaign on it.
So thank you.
So I thank you for your comments. I think it was also the use of social media to bring people to this room while it was convening, and so I sent a couple messages out, so I wasn't necessarily as responsive to all the hands, but was able to mobilize and bring folks here. So I think definitely I would say what's key about the IGF is making sure that we get stories from all the stakeholders. What are the best practices and maybe some concrete things that we can all work on going forward. Our time is up, but the discussion should not finish. And I'm really keen. I'll stay here for a few minutes, and if there's a way to engage this going forward. And I think one of the things, and Avery may be able to inform us, is how do we report, seeing this as an ad hoc workshop, what is a mechanism that some of us could then talk about this in whatever reporting process there is?
I think we can probably just report under Working Group 95, which I think this was. I think just because the meeting was canceled doesn't mean the opportunity to report on it wasn't there. Somebody obviously needs to write it up, and if someone wants to do a hashtag, perhaps WG95 is fair. Oh, you already have one.
Internet governance camp.
Internet governance camp. Okay.
Yeah, our session has been important.
Okay, if that works for you, okay.
It's not really a forum. We have people show up. up and you say what it is.
Yeah.
So it's internet governance scam.
Wow, interesting.
So with that, I thank everyone and look forward, and I'll stay here for a few minutes. Thank you.